Welcome to the Tesla Power Podcast, the Tesla energy community covering solar panel, solar roof, and power wall for your home. I'm Aaron Brady. Today, we have a packed show. So let's talk about how much is net metering really worth? Let's talk about operating without PTO. Let's talk about payment before PTO, the end of the Connecticut Green Bank Initiative, going solar to go green, and we finally have our 6-month review. How well has the solar roof performed, and how much have we saved? Let's find out. Don't forget that you can participate by leaving a comment below. You can link your own YouTube videos, and you can call 203-816-5150 or email teslapowerpodcast@gmail.com. Now, for those of you feeling ambitious, you can record an unlisted video question in the YouTube app, and you can send a link so I can put your video question in the show. First up, we have Dwight Adams. Just want to make sure he's queued up here. He brings up an important calculus in his comment on episode 36. Let's read his question or his comment. Quote, unfortunately, Florida is not friendly toward home solar. There's a proposed bill in the state Senate, SB 1024, to modify the net metering law to allow the PUC to set different rates to compensate utilities to collect more money from home solar owners. The bill may become law by January 2023 before I can purchase an EV. Instead of buying an EV in 2023 and a solar system several months afterward, I may need to first purchase a system before the 2023 date to be grandfathered into the current net metering rules, end quote. Now, that got me thinking, what kind of money would Dwight be leaving on the table if he didn't get net metering? So let's do some rough math. In order to do that math, we need to get some base numbers. So I found this resource on Unbound Solar, and if we scroll down, you'll see they have something called peak sun hours map, and we see that Florida residents have an average of 4.5 hours of peak sun per day. They're in this yellow field, and that maps out to the 4.5 hours. Now, this is just for each kilowatt of generation capacity. So let's check out what a tier 1 system might net us per day. If we go to Energy Sage, they have an excellent resource. Let me bring that full screen. And we can scroll pretty far down. They have this chart here. In fact, I can even zoom in a bit. We can see their chart showing tier 1 systems cap out at 10 kilowatts. So the calculation we're trying to make here, we'll use that number in this chart showing that Florida Power and Light Solar tier to calculate our daily production, but it ends up being pretty easy, right? So the 4.5 hours of sunlight per day on a 10 kilowatt system is 45 kilowatt hours per day. Now we'll need to multiply that out. So let me bring up the calculator. From this calculator, let's zero it out. We're going to take that 45 kilowatt hours per day. We're going to multiply it by every day, right? Now, keep in mind, these are just average numbers. They'll vary by season, daily weather patterns, but we can expect a yearly production average value of about 16,425 kilowatt hours per year for his solar system, just estimating. And that, of course, begs the question, what does Florida Power and Light charge per kilowatt hour? I've got the Florida Power and Light residential energy rate card here. So this is showing the rates starting in 2022. So this should be pretty accurate. It's a bit complicated because there's a split at 1,000 kilowatt hours of usage where your rate increases for the amount of power over that 1,000 kilowatt hours you consume on a monthly basis. But if we bring up our calculator, we can get to that total. Can I show that in the chart at the same time? No. So you're going to have to take my word for it, but here we go. Let's zero this out again. So times 0. So the less than 1,000 is 6.683 plus 7.6 83. And then there's a fuel surcharge for each rate as well, which is 3.487. I'm doing these in actual cents. So 4.487 cents. And then we divide all of that by 4 to get our average, which is going to be about 5.5 cents. So we're making that nice round assumption that monthly consumption is going to be 2,000 kilowatt hours. That's going to split us right between the two rates. That means we can average them all out like we've just done to get us that 5.5 cents per kilowatt hour. But we still need to add the other charges, of course, so that'll bring our effective rate up a bit. So we will add what they call conservation, whatever that is. So we're adding 0.0134. We're adding capacity, whatever the capacity charge is, plus the environmental charge, whatever that is. There's a storm protection charge. And for whatever reason, there's a transition credit. So we're going to subtract 0.0198. So that gives us about 12.5 cents per kilowatt hour. Now we take that number and we multiply by our 16,425 kilowatt hours used per year. And we get what our net metering would be worth if we're sending all of our electricity to the grid. That's going to be worth about $2,000 per year. Now, if we multiply that out for the life of the system, which is 25 years, it's about $50,000 per year for the system. Now, don't forget, this calculation presumes Dwight does not use any of his solar production locally. He has no local storage and therefore sends all of his production back to the utility for netting out. In practice, net metering is only going to matter for electricity that's sent back to the grid. That's not going to count for what he's using on demand or what he might be storing. That makes this calculation much more complicated, as it depends not only on total energy consumed versus produced, but when that energy is consumed and produced. So I've got my Tesla app. Let's take a look at what I've got here. I just want to make sure it's up before. I always have this struggle, but we're going to have to live with it. So now I am broadcasting, but I still don't see it. There it is. All right, so here's the Tesla app. It's just loading some of the data now. But we can see from my system that I'm not sending any electricity back to the grid now. You would see it down here at the bottom where it shows energy destinations. On this screen, we've got 44%. Can I zoom into that at all? No. Sadly, maybe I can. Hold on. Right, that should be a little bit easier to read. We don't need all that bottom content anyway. So you can see right down here at energy destinations, we've got 44% going to the home, 56% going to the battery, and then less than 1% going to the grid, essentially zero going to the grid. And this is because I'm not producing very much during these fall and winter months. This is for the month of December. Again, we're sending basically nothing back to the grid. But a more significant reason is that I'm storing that electricity locally rather than sending it back out to the grid. If I didn't have a battery, all of this stuff that's in green would be going back to the utility and would be netting out. But we don't end up having to net that out because we're just storing it and using it later. So I have to go all the way back to September, right, to see any significant net metering, for me anyway. So of that 1,060 kilowatt hours, you can see that total in the upper left-hand quarter. Solar generation was total 1,059.8. We're going to call it 1,060. I sent back 18% to the grid, and that 18% is shown down here in basically the lower center. That's, let's do some math, right? Let's bring up the calculator again. Yeah. So here's the calculator again. So if we take that 1,060 and we take the 18%, that's only about 190 kilowatt hours And my rate is about 20%. So we will multiply that by 0.2. 20 cents per kilowatt hour. That's about $40 of value that I realized in September from net metering. So if I only use net metering for 6 months out of the year, right, I'm not producing enough the rest of the year to even be sending anything back to the grid. Let's call that April through September. I don't have great data for those months, but we could see if we go back to my app, you can see that on average from September, August was 42%, quite high because I didn't use the battery at all. 20%, 10%, 17% where I'm barely using the system. I can see that it's not following me at the moment. My favorite. And it counts down a broadcast, so it's going to take a second to come back. But so here's where I was barely using the system. This is 10%, 22%, 42%, not using the battery at all, back down to about 20%, and then 2% as my production gets down. But if we're going to average 20% going back to the grid, we can use that number in the Florida Power and Light estimate to see what Dwight might use in the way of net metering. Back to the calculator. So we'll take that $50,000 that he's making on, that theoretical $50,000 if he were to send all of his electricity back to the grid, or if he were to have no storage. Just want to make sure it's zeroed out. So $50,000. We're going to cut that in half since we don't expect he'll be sending electricity out of the grid in the lower production months. So it's $25,000. We would then take the 20% of the remaining amount that would actually be netted, and we get a value of about $5,000 over the next 25 years. So, $5,000 over 25 years, that's nothing to hold out for, in my opinion, especially if you were to take a net present value of that cash today. It might be better, putting that in the market or something like that. But let's look at a max value, because this is, pretty conservative. We want to look at a max value based on the theoretical numbers to see if we get something significant. So if we pull up the Tesla app again, I want to make sure I'm broadcasting, of course. It looks like I am, but hard to tell. All right, start broadcast, switch over. Tesla app here. We can see I turned off my battery in August. And this gives us a real max net metering, right? And I sent 40% of my electricity production back to the grid. So let's use this percentage as our high-end estimate and assume no battery storage for an upper bound on the value of net metering. Back to our calculator. So, starting again from that $50,000 full value, we'll reduce that by seasonal production and consumption by 6 months. And then by the 40% we expect to send back to the grid for net metering. And that gives us $10,000. So we have an upper and a lower bound. Shall we take the mean to give us a realistic value for net metering? So 10,000 plus the 5,000 divided by 2 gives us that $7,500. Very interestingly, that's the value of a vehicle tax credit. Perhaps getting the vehicle is worth more in 2022 than locking in net metering in 2022, especially once you consider net present value. So all of this to show how complicated these calculations can get, and that maximizing the value of your system with incentives is going to be less valuable than you probably think, especially if the value is based on net metering. So, maybe net metering stays your numbers, but, maybe it doesn't matter that much. So put in your own numbers, of course. All of this is meant to be a helpful exercise to get an idea of how to take these variables into account. All right, next, we have more input from Marty Edwards. He is sending an email. I thought it was an important thing to discuss, though, so let's read it. He says, quote, "What if you turn on before PTO? If I lost power for days, I'd turn it on. I don't know what Eversource would do after that, though." End quote. Now, I do not have PTO. That's permission to operate. And that comes from the utility. That doesn't come from the government. I did turn my system on. Should be pretty obvious, right? Since I've been using the system without PTO. But to be clear, I don't know if I'll suffer some horrible fate, like maybe a huge fine or something like that. There are two main reasons why the utility requires PTO. Number one, the stability of the grid, and number two, the safety of the line workers. Now, addressing stability of the grid, if you're putting capacity onto the grid that the grid's not ready to handle, you risk frying transformers, and that'll then cause the grid to go down. You could also increase the frequency of the overall grid, which could then shut down capacity generation that has to be within a certain spec. Now, you're not going to do that as a single home, but en masse, if a lot of people went on the grid without PTO, the utilities would have a hard time regulating that frequency to make sure that it stayed within spec. But let's address, the safety of line workers. If the grid went down and you were exporting from your system while they were working on the lines, you might kill somebody. So, of course, our Tesla systems sense the presence of the grid, and they switch to off-grid mode when the grid is not present. That makes the risk exceedingly low. Of course, you can manually put yourself in off-grid mode through the app, but not everyone's system is that sophisticated. We can all probably then understand why the utility would insist that nobody be power on without permission. They're not going to know if you don't have permission to operate. They're not going to know that they need to go to your house and pull the manual shutoff to make sure there's no danger if they don't know you're there in the first place. So, of course, pulling the manual shutoff is another way that you can take an extra precaution. But let's take the wider view. If you've paid for the system, you have the right to use it. You do not, however, have the right to use it while connected to the grid. So just beware of the risks if you decide to proceed with using it, including the possible fines and criminal prosecution if something terrible happens. So I'm doing a bit of COA here, but I want to be upfront about the risks, the responsibilities, and all of that, deciding, if you decide to use your system without PTO. So far for me, no consequences, but we've yet to get PTO, so I'm by no means in the clear, and straight up, I might end up with a big problem in the future. All right, next, we have more from Northampton Arts Council. He is asking about PTO also. Let's take it full screen. Since you've not received PTO yet, have you had to give Tesla your down payment or any money? End quote. We have, in fact, paid in full. And you'll see this outlined in your contract from Tesla. So let's bring that up. I can bring it up full screen right away, I think. All right, so this is my solar purchase disclosure. And if I just scroll a little bit further down, you'll see there's payment schedule right here on the first page. So the amount you've paid to secure your order, $100. Amount you owe provider within 5 days of inspection, $57,949. So that inspection is the town inspection way before the utility gets involved. So the utility will do their own inspection, after which, as long as you pass, you'll be granted permission to operate, or PTO. Now, this is a huge part of why the delay getting PTO is such a big deal. The town's going to do their inspection. You owe the system payment in full 5 days after that inspection, but you might not get PTO, for days, weeks, and in our case, even months. So we paid for our system in full 6 months ago and haven't yet been able to officially use it. So as I pointed out in the last question, we've decided to turn the system on in spite of not getting PTO, but this is a risk for which we don't know the full consequence, if any. We'll see. All right, now next, Kevin is expecting his install in the next couple of weeks or so. I hope we're going to be able to share some sweet drone footage, maybe even get some interviews with the crew. We're definitely going to talk to Kevin, so stay tuned for that. In the meantime, Kevin got a disappointing update on incentives from the Tesla team. Let's take this full screen. Apparently, Tesla in Connecticut stopped participating together in the Green Bank program. Spoke to my project advisor today, who was able to explain that as of August 1st, 2021, they stopped participating in the program, end quote. So the value of this incentive isn't huge, but every little bit helps. If we pull up my contract again, we can see that the value, we can see what the value of that contract is, or what that incentive is. Let me pull it full screen, of course. So we have to scroll all the way down to the itemized portion, and you'll see it right down here at the bottom. It's listed as a credit for rebate value, right in the contract price header. It's $1,350.66 in my case. And it's a bit of a shame, but these rebates are in a pool of funds that get drawn down over time. And it's part of the early adopter advantage, right? You adopt early and you get some additional incentives. And we were at, where we are at the early adopter stage for the solar roof, we really aren't for standard solar in Connecticut anyway. And I think I just lucked out in that the incentive was still available when I got installed the solar roof earlier this year. But this is helpful for others in Connecticut to know that it's no longer available, so they aren't counting on it for justifying their projects or using it in their calculation for what they can afford. So thank you, Dwight Adams, Marty Edwards, Brian at Northampton Arts Council, and Kevin Giasulo for all of your input. We want to hear from the rest of you too, so send in your YouTube video links, comment below, call 203-816-5150, email teslapowerpodcast@gmail.com. Let's take a break. We'll cover a bit of news when we get back. Electrek reports on Tesla's supply chain woes that are affecting members of our community here. Let's read it. Quote, last month, we reported on early signs that the supply chain issues that are affecting Tesla's solar panel business. Now things have escalated to the point that the company is warning some customers who have permitted solar projects that they might see some delays, end quote. It's interesting that we've kind of come full circle from China dumping solar panels to a shortage of solar panels. It is true that Tesla has their own spec that has to be produced, so it's not exactly that simple, but it does kind of give us an idea of how a commodity business can be affected significantly by, both positively and negatively by supply shocks. So I hope it's resolved soon. If you're affected, let us know in the comments below. Next story. Arizona Public Services, that's the local utility there in Arizona. It's offering some rebates according to PV Magazine. Let's read it. Quote, a pilot program for owners of residential battery energy storage was launched by Arizona Public Service, APS, offering up to $3,750 in rebates for participants. To receive the rebate, APS customers must agree to share their batteries' data. Additional payments are available to those who agree to let APS dispatch their batteries' power during peak demand hours, end quote. These incentives are one-time payments. They are not demand response payments that would recur each season. Also, it was hard to find, but there are only two manufacturers that have been accepted into this program, SolarEdge and Enphase. It'd be really interesting to understand why Tesla wasn't accepted into the program, but be aware if you choose Tesla that this program is not for you. All right, lastly, we have PV Magazine again. They're reporting on a cold climate study comparing solar with propane. Let's read it. Quote, nice. An internal research team has sought to quantify the techno-economic characteristics of solar-powered heat pump solutions for residential buildings in isolated areas without natural gas supply in cold climates, and has found that by resorting to the electrified solution, homeowners may reduce costs by up to 20%. End quote. There's obviously some translation stuff there makes it a little bit awkward, but certainly there's a green element to this. You can run your pump sustainably without having to burn fossil fuels, but the real win here is that you're also independent. You don't need any fuel delivery, and there's no additional cost once the system is purchased. These customers happen to be out of the service area, so they couldn't even get propane. And of course, it doesn't mean that this is without maintenance altogether. So if I bring up the photo, you can see here that people who are surveyed have to maintain their solar panels by sweeping the snow off of those panels to make sure that they can still produce something. But other than that, it is maintenance free. So I just wanted to highlight this story as evidence that solar plus batteries really is the very best way to be self-sufficient from a cost perspective, from a maintenance perspective, from an energy supply perspective, and of course from an environmental perspective. So much winning. Solar and batteries are getting tired of winning. So that's the news. Let's take another quick break. When we come back, we'll talk about going solar to go green, and we'll dive into our 6-month review. So my brother-in-law scored some box tickets to a local hockey game this weekend. It ended up being 4 dads and 9 kids. You might call that mayhem. It was a beautiful mayhem. And during the game, we chatted a bit about solar and covered a couple of interesting aspects of it that I wanted to share with you guys here on the podcast. The first was power purchase agreements. And I was kind of surprised this came up. But for those of you who don't know, this is where you get solar for no upfront cost and just pay a monthly fee to the installer to purchase the power from them at a set rate over the life of the solar system. So I love this idea for a lot of reasons. It's democratizing and gives access to essentially everybody. It's easy to understand. The pricing is simple. The economics are straightforward. It's simple to design. You don't need to make any decisions about the system components or the design or the size or really anything. But there are 2 reasons not to love it. First, storage is not a part of the system. There are lease options that do include battery storage, but they won't be offered by default. And this means you're without power when the grid's down. This also adds to the instability of the grid, making grid down events more likely. So it kind of compounds on itself. Secondly, you can't sell your property without buying out your power purchase agreement. It may be possible to transfer that agreement to the new owners, but it isn't easy and it adds complication to the sale of the home. So my recommendation for him was to finance the purchase and make sure that he got storage without purchase. The next question that came up was, how big should the system be? Now, of course, this depends. So I was curious, do they have an electric car? Do they plan on getting one? Everyone was shocked at how much electricity a car needs. So the dad looking to get solar has essentially the same commute as the creative directive wife. So I was able to give him the rough 20 kilowatt hours per day of usage to estimate how big a system he might need to support his commute. Now, if we go back to the solar map, let me go ahead and bring that back up. We can see here that, we're in Connecticut, we're in the Northeast, and you can see we're in the 4.2 maximum sun hour range. So a 5 kilowatt system would be needed to fuel the car for a daily commute, on average again. Of course, double that for the remainder of the home, and we're looking at about a 10 kilowatt system to get close to meeting their needs. I kept making the financial case for each option, but he stopped me. He was like, dude, I just want to do this to go green. Financials weren't the motivating factor, and it kind of broke my brain a little bit. It totally took me aback because I really haven't spoken with very many people that have a purely altruistic motivation for going solar. Now, ours wasn't purely financial, right? We were looking to do like the cool factor. Like we wanted to be first adopters and we wanted something that was beautiful. But, for those that are looking to go green, definitely cool. And if you're looking to maximize the good that you're doing, then I would say that getting as many batteries as possible will allow you to do as much good as possible. This dad happens to be in the United Illuminating Service Area, so there's no virtual power plant or any kind of demand response program like there is in Eversource, but it does mean that he'll be able to use more of his solar more of the time if he gets batteries, and he'll be able to minimize the less green power that happens to come from our grid. So, a quick update on production. Let me bring up my phone again and see if I can get this broadcasting reasonably quickly. I do wish that it would be persistent. That would surely make my life a lot better. All right, so it is now live. If we go to the daily view, you'll see that it hasn't been that bad. It's been pretty good, in fact. We just rolled over midnight, so as I'm recording this, so that was today's no production. So officially yesterday's production was only 5.7 kilowatt hours, which is kind of a low day, but there were only really a couple of those. There were some reasonably strong days considering these are the shortest days of the year. This is 21 kilowatt hours. There's another short day, but 20 kilowatt hours, 22 kilowatt hours, 24 kilowatt hours. Jumping over to my brother-in-law's system, I took a screenshot because you might remember that his interface sucks, so I can't look at these curves on demand. I can only get them at certain times. I don't even know when. It just seems random to me. But you can see that his traditional solar panel system's still underperforming our solar roof because of the low sun. You can see that he is month to date at 106 kilowatt hours. Of course, on this day, he was at 16 kilowatt hours, and we outproduced him by about 25% at 21 kilowatt hours, 21.5 kilowatt hours. His month-to-date value is 106 kilowatt hours. But if we go back to the Tesla app and we look at our month-to-date for December 2021, we are at 134 essentially kilowatt hours month to date. So feels good to be winning. Now, for the numbers we've all been waiting for, right? We finally got our November bill, so we now have enough detail to do the 6-month review. Let's have a look at the full month production and consumption numbers along with the utility bills pre and post solar roof for June through November. So that's for both 2020 and 2021. I have them up. So this is June 2020. This is the biggest savings of the year. We can see that last year it was $532.15. This year down to $156. That is outstanding. Last year's July bill, $528. This year's July bill down to $317. Not as awesome, but I'll still take the savings, no doubt. This is last year's August, due in September, but this is August use. $449. This year's August, only $217. Last year's September at $405. This year's September at $124. That's a pretty big delta. Last year's October, almost $300. This year's October, only $78. Love it. Last year's November, $257. And this year's November, $117 total. And I've got a spreadsheet and some simple charts to visualize this data that we've got so far. And just to cover some highlights, let's pull up that spreadsheet. These are the actual calculations. I'll bring it full screen so we can see it as well as possible. This is the year 2020. I can see that I put in the commas. We shouldn't be doing that. So we won't use the 1,000 separator for those. So in 2020, we didn't produce anything. That's why these are all zero. I did mark the consumption that was in our utility bill for each month. Don't forget that those aren't actual numbers. Those are just numbers based on the reading of the meter. and they don't read the meter every month. They do some extrapolations and stuff like that. A little disappointing, but it's not going to be an apples to apples comparison with our utility consumption that the app shows this year. So just keep that in mind. And then, of course, all of the amounts for each bill for the first 6 months. Now, this line shows our production for 2021. These are full month productions. We turned on our system at the end of May of this year. So we have a full month of June's data. These are the consumptions that are shown in our app. So these should be actual consumption numbers, not just the average that they use on our utility bill or whatever algorithm they use on the utility bill. I did put in the utility consumption so that we can do some analysis on this later, but I'm not really sure what I'm looking at yet, so I need to spend some time with those numbers before I'm ready to do any analysis. And then, of course, the amount of the bills this year so that we can compare them with last year. Some of the changes that are super interesting. So our consumption delta, how come we don't have anything here? These are based on the utility bills. So again, this isn't very helpful information at the moment. But the change in price is very helpful. And then I'm showing that savings as a cumulative total here in this last set of cells. So we've saved almost $1,500 just in the first 6 months of using the system. Not nothing. I'm pretty happy with that all told. So I'm definitely taking a hit on efficiency losses by using the battery so much. Without PTO, I don't see how I have much choice. But once I get PTO, I'll be reserving the battery like I did in August. That way I can preserve my battery and maximize my net metering, especially since I haven't been getting net metering benefit this year. I am still on track to pay for the system, though these projections are quite optimistic, at least a little optimistic, since the 6-month period of this analysis includes the best production month of the year. We'll revisit our numbers at a full year for a comparison, and get updates to the projections and payback period and stuff like that. What I did want to show you, though, were some of the graphs, and I kind of thought that I would just go through those organically, but this is a comparison from our bills last year and this year. The blue bill is last year's. The red bill is this year's. The second graph is showing the projection, taking this 6 months and extrapolating it over the 25-year lifespan of panels. It's showing that I would expect to spend $120,000 on electricity over the next 25 years before solar. But now that I have solar, I am going to spend less than $60,000, probably about $50,000 in electricity over the next 25 years. Graph 3 shows our actual consumption over the last 2 years. So blue is 2020, red is 2021. Don't forget that 2020 is just the extrapolated amounts. They don't read the meter every month. But the red is what's showing in the app. And you can see that there are a lot more extremes. And I wanted to compare the two to show how our consumption differed. And maybe the utilities algorithm favors us because it shows that we consumed less. It was a pandemic year, so I guess it's possible, but unlikely because we spent a lot more time at home. So I would have expected that we would have, used a lot more electricity. But we didn't, according, to those numbers. If we're comparing again the utility bill to the app. Utility bill in 2020, the app in 2021. This graph number 5, this is showing our monthly savings in negative. So this is what's coming off of the bill compared with last year. And then graph number 6 is showing our cumulative savings. The savings ramp up in the summer and then they kind of even out and then taper in the later months. I would expect this to be pretty close to a pure sine wave, on average over the, several years. But, we'll see how it goes. I'm sure you have questions. Hit me up in the comments below. And that will wrap episode 38 of the Tesla Power Podcast. You are welcome, of course, to use my referral code. You can save yourself some money by going to the referral page. You'll be able to save yourself $500 on a solar roof and $300 on solar panels. You'll need to go to this page to place your order. You can see order yours is down here at the bottom. And that link, of course, is https://ts.la/Aaron62310. Go there to place your order. And thank you for joining us. I mean, if you've made it this far, that's pretty tremendous. I am your residential energy community organizer, Aaron Brady. Let's do this again on the next video.